Here we are at the east end of Du Bois Yard, and you can see the caboose of the train that just came through the crossing. And to the right, where you can see the ballasted track, or at least partially ballasted, you can see the two chassis system main lines, and they had recently, in the early 70s, taken out one of their mains, so I've put some wood ties in there that are stained, and I'll ballast around those just to make it look like they pulled the rails and some of the ties, but not all of the ties. Then we have the 3-track yard in Du Bois, and what I've been doing, and I think I've discussed this previously, is hand laying the spur into Burke Parsons Boley. So this is all wood ties, hand laid code 70. I made a transition just by flattening the one side of a standard code 83 rail joiner and then soldering that to the code 70 rail and sliding that onto the code 83. Seems to line them up almost perfectly horizontally and vertically. I spiked every 5 ties. Seems to be more than adequate for, certainly for a spur. Get a shot looking down. I'm really satisfied with the amount of variation in the ties. Knowing that this is a spur and not mainline, I wanted to make sure that a lot of the ties had a light gray color rather than just a jet black color or dark brown. And I think that worked out really well, so I can't wait to see how this looks ballasted. As I did over in Riker Yard, I will probably come in and add a little bit of weathering to these ties by hand before I paint the rails. Obviously the rails need to be painted throughout this whole yard and spur area. But it turned out pretty well. And so far it operates nicely. I've got all my feeders installed. Don't have any problems with locomotives or rolling stock. So I've got a little bit of a jog, and that'll be where it comes across the driveway entrance to the creosote plant. Where the flat car is sitting, I'm going to use as a team track. This area of western Pennsylvania still has a number of oil and natural gas wells. I think it really has for a long time, so I'm not sure. And I think there is a team track type area there now, but this is a little bit of modeler's license. I'm going to have a team track here in Du Bois that will take well casings and things of that nature that are pretty heavy and might be challenging to truck out into the middle of western Pennsylvania. So give me some additional traffic. I think I've got a tire wholesaler who gets boxcars full of tires here as well too, just to add some additional interest. And it also probably isn't prototypical, or I know it's not, at Burke Parsons Boley, that the team track is in a series with the plant itself. Just for space considerations, I didn't have much of a choice. So it does make it a little bit challenging, because as you're building your local in the yard, you really do have to get everything sorted out in order before you make the pulls and shoves all the way into this long spur. So it certainly creates operating interest. Whether or not it's accurate is secondary, I guess. So this is hand laid all the way up to where the turnout is, and this area I've discussed before. The prototype actually has a switchback, which I'm not sure why. I think it was because the Penn Central and B&O both served it from opposite sides. I don't have that configuration available to me here, and the switchback I think would just be too complicated to fit in here. So I guess to some extent having the team track on a series with this industry is kind of a stand-in for having to do that extra maneuver of working through the switchback into the plant. But it does appear that there are 2 tracks in the plant. I'm going to assume that they bring tank cars full of creosote into one track, and that gets heated up by steam and then moved into the plant for the process. And this section of track here is going to be the timber yard where they bring in raw timber that needs to be dried before it's processed. So that'll take 4 or so gondolas. And then there's 6 spots in my software, in the Ship It software. I have 6 spots that are actually in the plant, so to speak. So I'm trying to figure out how I want to configure this. I really can't fit the prototype in here the way I'd like, so I do plan on hand laying this turnout, but before I do that, wanted to make sure I knew where I was going to set the building. I'd really like to have the building in the back, or at least part of it in the back, and maybe do an L shape come across. Not prototypical, but I would like the building to be here to be able to hide the fact that the Penn Central lines just kind of terminate at the backdrop here. So I think it's probably going to end up being similar to how it is now. So I might do a code, this is a code 6 Atlas. Might make it a little narrower just to save some room and get the tracks separated more quickly. So I have, it's a little bit close at this end on the one track if you've got 3 cars in each track. So I might do a code 5, not code 5, a number 5 turnout rather. And in this spot, since I'm hand laying it, I can essentially do whatever geometry I'd like, and I may do that. Where in reality, I think the building would be here, and the one track would come alongside of it, and then the creosote track, actually the creosote track would come alongside of it, and then the track where they load the finished ties would be off to the right, kind of behind the building. So, haven't quite decided how I'm going to do that yet, and until I do that, I'm not going to hand lay a turnout, because I certainly don't want to hand lay it twice. So, that is what I've been working on in terms of track. So again, very happy with how that came out, and it was really enjoyable. I really did, it's the first time I've ever hand laid anything other than that crossing that we just did a run through of at the beginning of the video. And now that was all done on mostly print circuit board ties and soldered, so this was all, there's no soldering here at all except for those transition rail joiners. And I did stagger the seams. These are 18-inch pieces of micro engineering track. I staggered the joints so that they're not lined up across from each other. And just glued the wood ties down first along the geometry that I wanted, then came back in, tried to center the track within the ties, and I think I'm using 3/16 inch spikes, so they're going all the way through the tie and into the homosote as well too. So seems pretty rigid. We'll see if that stands the test of time and some expansion and contraction. My basement does get much drier in the winter time, so we'll see if that has any impact on this particular track and the performance of it. So also doing a little bit of work over on the bench to relieve my locomotive motive power shortage. So I will turn the camera around and we'll go over there. Okay, to help rectify my shortage of motive power, on eBay I purchased a pair of B&O F7s. And I deliberately picked 1974 to model for a number of reasons. It got me before Conrail, and as a kid I saw almost nothing but Conrail blue, so I've preferred to model before that so I can have some of the variety of paint schemes and so forth. And who would have thought, now that Norfolk Southern runs here, who would have thought that we'd ever long to see Conrail blue again, but black and white is even worse than blue and white. So anyway, the B&O retired all of its F7s in 1975. I believe that some of the Western Maryland F7s lasted longer because WM was notorious for actually keeping their equipment in good shape, which can't be said as much for the B&O. So for those reasons, and probably some others, is why I elected to model 1974. And the Athearn, as is typical of these blue box units of any variety of the shell styles, they were kind of a homogenized in terms of details back then. Athearn didn't do much to, or at least doesn't appear that they did much to make a unit specific to its actual railroad or prototype. So in an effort to make them a little bit more accurate with some of the photos that I've seen, I've started to modify them. So one point is both of the F7s that I bought had steam equipment, presumably for passenger service, so I carefully trimmed all that out and filled that with putty. They had a pair of single chime horns, one facing front, one facing back. The B&O, actually, depending on which F7 you're talking about, some of them had, looks like Nathan N5 chimes, some had Leslie 3 chimes, so I'm just going to have to determine which units I'm modeling and apply the appropriate horns. But they seem to be on the, just kind of over top of the engineer's side, so I'll have to figure out exactly where they go. There was also a bit of a, probably can't see, maybe you can, a bit of a parting seam all the way down this part that I cleaned up and sanded down, so it should be relatively smooth. And then the other thing that I ended up doing on both of them is the entrance door in the front of the nose had a second, or I guess that was the primary headlight, and maybe the upper one was a Mars light. But the B&O photos I've seen of everyone, not just the ones that were on my specific portion of the railroad, none of them that I've seen had a headlight lens in the door. So I've cleaned those up by, same thing with the horns. I adhered just a real thin piece of styrene inside as a backstop to putty against, and then puttied them up and carefully sanded them smooth. And in so doing, was able to get, this needs one more priming. I've been doing some priming and sanding just to get some of the real fine scratches out, but you can see that headlight is now gone. The horns, you can see just a little bit where the primer filled in just slightly low there, and then I got one more shot to do here to make that smoothed out. And I haven't historically, since these are B&O locomotives, I don't generally strip the locomotive before I paint it. Now these are going to get painted the blue with yellow lettering, which is the 1960s scheme, and none of B&O's F7s were treated, that I'm aware of, were treated with the chassis system paint because they were retired much too early. But I have seen loads and loads of photographs where you can see some of the historic paint markings coming through. So these I sanded down just to make sure I didn't have a lip. The gold particularly is a little high, and you can see that a little bit more pronounced than I'd like, but I think it's worked out on my GP7 that I didn't even sand it. I just painted right over it. And you can see a little bit of the ghosting underneath, but again, I think that's somewhat prototypically accurate. I also purchased some Walther's F7 dress-up kits. So you can see I've got the handrails started here. Whole bunch of detailed parts are going to go on this. Again, it's a Athearn blue box. Probably not worth it, but I enjoy it, and they're going to reflect the actual locomotives that ran on this particular section of track. And this one, I think I'm going to make a unit that actually had silver trucks. I think they might have bought it from Bessemer and Lake Erie. I'll have to check the research, but I think it's 4569. And I've got a photograph in Mike Zolich's book of that, so I'm actually running on the former BR&P. So I think this one's going to be modeled after that. That one does not appear to have a winterization hatch, although many of them did. Just given the fact that this line ran up into Buffalo. So I think it's the fourth fan that gets the winterization hatch. Something else that I transitioned on this project, you can see this is white putty up here. That was squadron putty. I have taken my squadron putty tube and just thrown it in the garbage because that stuff is so dry that it just, it sets up so fast. I can't figure out a way to work it. And maybe you can thin it. Not sure. I know that Ron on Ron Trains and Things did a study between, I think, Tamiya putty and squadron putty, and that seemed to prove out that the squadron putty was also thicker than he would have preferred. And I forget where I got this. It was from another modeler, probably somewhere on YouTube. But Bondo glazing and spot putty, this is very, very easy to work. It's very thin, sands very easily, and I think this is going to be my new putty for doing body work on locomotives. I did it on the front door here and on the steam equipment. A little bit of a gouge there that I had to fill in. And my preference entirely is this Bondo glazing and spot putty. Like I said, for me the squadron putty just seemed too dry and kind of almost too coarse. So far, we'll see, but so far I think I'm sold on this Bondo product, and I think that'll be what I'm going to use moving forward. So these will also get, MU hoses. The Walther's kit has some handrails that run up the side of the nose. As I mentioned, I'll put the appropriate horn on now that the old, not accurate horns have been removed. And I've also have a whole bunch of Canon and Company 36-inch fans, so I'll have to go buy an indexed drill because I think that'll be the easiest way to drill these out, but I may actually change all 5 of these fans out to a Canon and Company really highly detailed fan. The Walthers kit has the windows for the portholes and windshield, and yes, to you purists out there, I know that's the biggest problem with the Athearn F7 is that they have somewhat square windshields, whereas the prototypes were a very, very attractive GM design where they were, rounded in the corners. But I'm not going to go to that detail. I've seen some people really correct them and spend a lot of time, but I'm not going to opt to do that. So I think that is it. So hopefully I'll get at least one of these running soon. I do have a decoder for one of them. So as is my custom, I'm going to do TCS Wow Sound diesel decoders. And these Athearn Blue Boxes were actually called Super F7s or something like that, I guess because they've got this giant weight. They weigh almost a pound each, which is good. They're going to be good pullers. But in order to fit that in there, or fit the decoder in, I had to commission my youngest stepson, who's a machinist, to notch the top of this out. And he's got a little raceway for the wires as well, but I mean, look at that. That fits perfect. You can't ask for much more than that. I mean, it doesn't even jiggle. That's outstanding. And then the Keep Alive fits right in there as well too. I'll have to suspend a speaker over the top of the rear truck, but that's going to be, I'm really happy with that. So thanks, Ryan, for your help on that. And these F7s are great because unlike a GP7 where it's a hood unit, these cowl bodies, you've actually got a decent amount of space to work with, although it's consumed a lot by this weight. But so hopefully before too long I'll have at least one of these running because I am desperately in need of more horsepower on the railroad. So stay tuned for more.